After an exciting British Grand Prix which saw a surprise podium result for Lando Norris in the Mclaren, F1 move on to Budapest for the Hungarian Grand Prix, which means that once again it is time for my preview and predictions. This is the series where I'll be previewing, and then at the end of the video I'll be giving out my early predictions for the Grand Prix. Now let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes and Red Bull later on, so stick around for that. The Hungarian Grand Prix is a completely different challenge for the teams versus what we saw at Silverstone. Silverstone is one of the fastest circuits on the calendar with high-speed corners such as Copse, Maggots, Beckett's and Chapel. However, the Budapest circuit features many slow-speed corners with a lot of tight and twisty sections and many chicanes. This is why the Budapest circuit is often referred to as Monaco without the walls. Because of this, teams typically run Monaco levels of downforce. However, since DRS has been incorporated into the sport, we typically see plenty of overtakes at the circuit, mainly because the drag reduction is much higher at this circuit when DRS is activated, and the main straight is just long enough to be effective. This means though that cars that were strong at Monaco are likely to have a good weekend at Budapest. However, given how much some of the cars have changed since then, we could still see a different running order. This means that going into this race there is certainly an air of excitement, especially for midfield teams such as McLaren, who had an incredible British Grand Prix. If they can be strong at this circuit like they were at Silverstone, then there is a real chance that McLaren could even finish in the top 4 in the Constructors' Championship, as they will be great at two completely different types of circuits. This weekend will be one of the few race weekends where Pirelli has opted to change the tyres from last year. Last year, Pirelli took the C2, C3 and C4 tyres. However, the hard C2 tyres were a complete disaster as they were way too hard for the circuit and offered very little grip as it was almost impossible to generate tyre temperature. Because of this, Pirelli has gone a step softer, and this weekend it will be the C3, C4 and C5 tyres, meaning that it will now be the 3 softest tyres in the Pirelli range. Last year there was a total of 42 pit stops, as the majority of teams did 2 stops. However, a few teams did have to do a 3 pit stop strategy. With Pirelli taking a step softer tyres, I expect we will see teams also do a 2 stop once again, but some teams who are harder on their tyres, such as the Haas team, will be forced into a 3 stop strategy. Typically, tyre wear is high around this circuit, especially when you take into consideration the high temperatures at Budapest around this time of year. As I mentioned earlier, overtaking at Budapest is not the easiest, but it is possible, especially with the high amounts of drag reduction that you can expect with the DRS, and you can see that as last year there was a grand total of 61 on-track overtakes, making it one of the races with the most overtakes all year long. To help with overtaking, Budapest features 2 DRS zones, one down the main pit straight and the other on the exit of turn 1 into turn 2. And this means that if you don't get it done down the pit straight, you do have a second opportunity to pass the car ahead going into turn 2. However, this overtake typically requires a much more daring move into the corner due to the hairpin being relatively high speed, and the overtake is much more difficult going into turn 2 as opposed to going into turn 1. Last year's pole position lap time was a 1:17.377 by George Russell in the Mercedes, as the Silver Arrows took its one and only pole position for the year. Not only did Mercedes score pole position, but they also took the fastest lap of the race, as well as the fastest lap time in the Grand Prix was a 1:21.386 by Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. With Pirelli taking softer tyres, I imagine that the fastest lap in qualifying will definitely be beaten, as will the fastest lap in the race, especially if we get a late race safety car, similar to what happened last time out at Silverstone. So with that in mind then, let's now get to the top 4 teams, and let's start with Ferrari. For Ferrari, the British Grand Prix was a very difficult weekend. Had qualifying on Saturday been fully dry, then they could have started the British Grand Prix race a little bit higher up the field, but once again for the Scuderia, when it came to the race pace on the hardest tyres in the Pirelli range, they had none of it to give. With Budapest being on the softest tyres, then I do think it will be possible that they will have a slightly better race. Back in Monaco, Ferrari had decent race pace, and with Budapest also being a race where they are at maximum downforce, then I do think it will be possible for them to have a potential shot at a podium. One of Ferrari's strengths has been their efficiency with their downforce, meaning that we may see Ferrari have some decent pace that was very much missing last time out at Silverstone. For Sainz, a British Grand Prix was a bit of a disaster. It had potential to be a good race for him until Perez went to overtake him. After this moment, Sainz went on to lose 3 places in a very short space of time. For his teammate Charles Leclerc, the early stages of the race for him were looking pretty good, and he was able to hold off George Russell in the Mercedes, despite Russell being on a step softer tyres. However, a Ferrari strategy call led to him losing a lot of positions in the Grand Prix, and that really did cost him in that race. And also, given last year Ferrari got the strategy completely wrong, also with Charles Leclerc, they will be looking to improve once again in the strategy department going into this race. For Aston Martin, last time out at Silverstone was not a strong race, but it was never gonna be a great race for them. The high-speed nature of the circuit is not something that works for them at all. Thankfully though, for Aston Martin, Budapest should work perfectly for them. They are well suited to slower speed corners, which is why Alonso was so strong at Monaco and also Montreal. This means that I do expect the Hungarian Grand Prix to be a much better weekend for the Aston Martin team, and I would not be surprised if a podium is awaiting for Alonso if Aston Martin can nail the weekend. There is no doubt in my mind now that the bigger teams are closing the gap on Aston Martin, and there was always a feeling of inevitability that Mercedes and Ferrari would overtake Aston Martin in terms of pace, and now they are pretty close to doing that. For Mercedes, the British Grand Prix was a tale of two halves. Over one lap, the Mercedes was really struggling for pace, and had qualifying been fully dry, then there is a chance that neither Mercedes would have made Q3. However, in terms of race pace, Mercedes had brilliant race pace, and were only beaten by McLaren and Max Verstappen when it comes to overall pace. The Hungarian Grand Prix then, I think, can be a great race for them. They were strong in Montreal, and they had okay pace at Monaco, and also last year they had a brilliant race at Budapest. So with that in mind, the competition behind Red Bull is looking very, very tight, and it will be one of the tightest races of the year in my opinion between Ferrari, Aston Martin and Mercedes. George Russell had a brilliant race at Silverstone, but unfortunately for Russell, he was shafted by the timing of the safety car, as he deserved the potential podium finish. Sadly for George though, it was not to be for him, but for his teammate Lewis Hamilton, he was able to score the podium, as the safety car played perfectly into his hands as he stayed out until the safety car came out, and the safety car meant that Hamilton was able to jump Piastri and take yet another podium at Silverstone. It could be very possible for Mercedes to once again get a podium this weekend, as like I said, I do think they could be pretty strong at Budapest. Finally for Red Bull, Silverstone was the most difficult race of the season in terms of pace for them. Perez struggled somewhat, and Verstappen took a few laps before he was able to start opening the gap to the competition, which is a nice change. With Hungary being a high downforce circuit, the Red Bull you can expect will be very strong when DRS is being used because of their DRS efficiency. This means that if Perez has another shocking qualifying, then he should find it somewhat easy to make his way through the field, and speaking of Perez, he must surely be starting to feel like he is under pressure. The reason being that Daniel Ricciardo has returned to F1 with AlphaTauri, and it seems like Red Bull are going to be evaluating both Tsunoda and Ricciardo. If either driver impresses the Red Bull bosses, then there could be definitely a chance that Perez's seat comes under pressure for 2024. So what are my early predictions for the Hungarian Grand Prix? Well, for pole position, I am going to go for Max Verstappen, as he is still racing in a class of his own. But what about the race? Well, for P5, I am going to say it will be Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P4 will be Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. P3 will be Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, as I do anticipate that Aston Martin will have a stronger race. P2 will be Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, and Max Verstappen will of course win once again. And that means that yes, the record for all-time consecutive race wins will be beaten, as McLaren's record will be beaten by a Red Bull. The top midfield driver will be Lando Norris in the McLaren, as the Papaya team have fully moved forward with their new car. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.